What is going on in the real estate market? Hey, look, while the economy may be maintaining high interest rates, the balance of power in the housing market is shifting way back towards buyers. According to the recent National Association of Realtors, NAR's poll, home sales decreased over 4% in the last month. Additionally, the Department of Housing and Urban Development reports a 12% decrease in the number of new construction starts last month. A spike in mortgage rates coupled with rising inflation has dampened what is typically this peak season right now for real estate. Consequently, builders are halting new home projects and buyers are becoming increasingly discerning. So what will happen with the American dream? What's the big deal between the buy and rent comparison, and which one should you do right now? Let's take an examination of which one makes more sense depending on your circumstances. So as we consider the differences between rent and buy and which one makes more sense, we have to start with this big article that came out from the Wall Street Journal, and that is the rising cost of home ownership. No, I'm not just talking about interest rates, and I'm not talking about the rising prices of homes. I'm talking about the rising expenses relating to owning a home. Homeownership expenses have escalated beyond just the purchase price, with homeowners now spending an average of $10,000 annually on maintenance and property taxes. Here are 5 areas where costs have been surging in recent years. Number 1, down payment. As interest rates are climbing, banks just tighten up their criteria. They're requiring larger down payments, and that's requiring more upfront investment from buyers. That's before you even make your purchase, you're needing more money towards the house, which a lot of buyers don't have, particularly first-time home buyers. The second is your mortgage. Look, interest rates are some of the highest we've seen in a long time, and these borrowing costs have increased significantly, with rising interest rates reaching the fall peak, which some thought would be the highest level that we would see this century, and now we're right back at it in the spring market. A third cost that keeps rising is maintenance. The cost of home maintenance continues to rise due to a number of escalating fees for material, but notably on the labor side, which has surged dramatically since the pandemic. On average, homeowners now face about 8% higher maintenance costs than just last year this time, with annual maintenance costs averaging $6,600 per home. I used to budget just $2,000. This is a drastic increase in what you need to budget and keep aside on average for expected maintenance costs on your home. Another big one, the fourth one, property taxes. Property taxes have also been steadily increasing because guess what? As the cost of everything increased, so did cities need to drive up the property tax values to keep up with inflation. So the average property taxes now have increased about 4% just this year over last year. The biggest one, the biggest cost is insurance. And you've been reading about this all across the news, and different states are affected more than others, but home insurance costs have seen the most dramatic increases. This is driven by higher material and labor costs, which we talked about earlier, but also there's been more frequent claims, especially from more natural disasters occurring, windstorms, tornadoes, etc. With these increased costs, the insurance rates have risen as much as 60%, which is huge because the cost for insurance is also the cost for them to have to go out and do the repair on the claims. And those costs have also gone up, as we talked about with the increased maintenance cost earlier. Previously, homeownership provided a buffer against annual expense hikes, unlike renting, where say your landlord could just increase the rent yearly. However, rising homeownership costs are shifting this dynamic, making the rent versus buy decision heavily dependent on local conditions and personal circumstances. Economists are optimistic about potential lower rates still within this year, maybe a couple years. Yet this raises the big question: will homeownership evolve into more of a luxury, exclusive market? So let's jump back into the rent versus buy. Should you rent or should you buy? And that has a lot of personal decisions. Look, housing is a necessity. That means that you only have one of 2 options: to either buy or to rent. And what's interesting is if you examine other countries in the world, we're one of the only countries where ownership is far majority than rent. So when to do this is going to depend a lot on timing and personal circumstances, but let's dive into some pluses and cons of each. Many countries have rental rates that are closer to our ownership rates. After all, the American dream is home ownership, but timing is always an important market indicator, and that decision is especially difficult these days with interest rates and rents rising drastically. So let's cut to the bottom line. Look, interest rates have risen at a rate higher than rents, which rents have risen too, just not nearly as much. The typical break-even point for renting versus buying is around 5%, and that rate is at near 7% today. And that's why we're seeing more people opt to rent right now than to buy. Is there anything wrong with renting? No, of course not. You can save not having house repairs and other costs associated with owning. But the downside is that rental housing options are much more limited. As there's more demand for this segment, that might change over time. But it seems like a lot of the options for renting are multifamily developments, like the stacked flats or the apartment style that we're all used to. Simply put, deciding whether to rent or buy is a significant financial and lifestyle choice. Here are some arguments for both sides. If you're looking to buy a home, here's a couple big ones. Look, when you buy a home, you're building equity. That's a big one. When you buy a home, your monthly mortgage payments contribute to building equity, which is a form of savings. So over time, as you pay down the mortgage, and if the property value increases, then you have built up equity that you can use, which are substantial long term. If you have a volatile life and you're moving a lot, that's not gonna make sense. Another big one on buying is long-term cost savings. And although buying a home involves a lot of upfront costs, such as your down payment and then the closing costs, homeownership can be cheaper in the long run, especially compared to renting. If you get a fixed rate mortgage, you'll have constant payments, which rents typically increase each year. Another big benefit of ownership is tax benefits. Homeowners can take advantage of various tax deductions because in America, we pay for homeownership. You can't do that as you rent. These deductions on mortgage interest and property taxes can have significant lower cost on the net cost of home ownership versus renting. Another reason to own, stability and control. Hey, this is the big one. This is the cultural American dream, right? Because owning a home provides stability. There's no risk of eviction due to the lease not renewal, and you have greater freedom to customize or improve the property without needing your landlord's approval. That is the American dream, right? Everybody wants to own their own castle without somebody else telling them what they can and can't do. The last reason that you should consider buying over renting is because there's a big potential for appreciation. Real estate typically appreciates over time, and that has provided potential profit if you sell the home in the future. This isn't every market, and every market is different, so trust an expert, go to an expert. But in my market, for example, the average since 1987 is an appreciation of 3.9% year over year. 4% is pretty darn good, especially when you start looking at CDs, or not bonds right now, but in most typical years, a bond. So it could be good just as an appreciative asset to own a home. But let's look at some arguments for why you should consider renting. The first one is flexibility, and this is perhaps the biggest reason that I think that people should rent. Renting offers much more flexibility than owning a home because it's easier and less costly to move from one rental property to another, particularly as opportunities or life circumstances change. You don't have to sell a property, and that doesn't have the constraint that you do when you have home ownership. Another big one that everyone cites is there's no maintenance cost or repair bills. Renters are generally not responsible for maintenance of any sort. So any of those repair costs, your landlord does. If an appliance stops working or a major system needs repair, that landlord is responsible for it, not the tenant. And that is a big benefit. Another one is there's no real estate market risk. We don't know what the market's gonna do a year or 2 years from now. We don't know what politician's gonna be in, and these market fluctuations create a lot of risk. You don't have to worry about the possibility of losing any value when you're renting, which can have huge financial risk if you're a homeowner. Another reason, there's a lower initial cost. Renting typically requires a less substantial initial financial outlay than, say, buying, where you need a giant down payment with the bank. While buying requires a large down payment, renting only requires a security deposit, which is usually a first month or two's rent. You also, when you rent, have opportunities to invest that money you would have put into buying a home elsewhere. Money not tied up in homeownership can be invested in other opportunities that yield even higher returns, such as maybe the stock market. And renters can potentially invest that money saved from not paying for maintenance, taxes, and other homeownership costs that we talked about earlier. Look, all these arguments reflect the general pros and cons, but personal circumstances like financial stability, job security, lifestyle preference, and market conditions can significantly affect the decision of whether you should rent or buy. So should you rent? Should you buy? I don't know. I sell homes. I'm an owner, but it's not for everyone. Comment down below and let me know your thoughts on rent or buy in today's market 2024. Love to hear your feedback. Thanks for watching. If you want more market updates, news on luxury real estate, or things happening in the Iowa City market, make sure to subscribe down below. See you again next time.